worried that you might be the cool kid you wear the latest fashions on top of all the trends? Or have you ever worried you were too much in the mainstream, always so generic, more normal than your friends? Well, we've devised a test to put to rest your fears. There's no need to panic if you lend us your ears. Tonight you can't sleep easy after all that you've heard, 'cause if you like the show, then you're probably a nerd. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all. Tyler, Phil, and Boris. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all in Canon.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the It's Canon podcast, the show and podcast where we talk about all things geek, all things pop culture, anything and everything, because it is all in canon. We're your hosts. I'm Boris, and I'm joined by Phil.
I'm going to join the crowd and become subdued, Phil.
And Tyler.
I am riled up and ready to go, Tyler, today, so it'll be a good time.
I love it. I love it. And it is a special episode. In the last episode, we did say that we wanted to go in depth. We feel that we put out a better product when we go in depth on certain subjects. I know as a fact, that the audience likes it when we go in depth with certain subjects. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be talking court cases, Marvel's past, creators, creator contracts, and everything. And I think as the resident expert in this domain, it's only natural that Tyler gets us going.
Woo, woo, woo! So not only are we going to touch on Marvel, we have to touch on some other funny stories, including news from just today. So we're also going to talk about the Toronto Eaton Centre, Jason Voorhees, and the International Burn Convention.
Love it. Love it.
So what we're talking about today is two sets of legal cases that are going on right now. So very recently, the estates or individuals, because I think two of them are still alive, one of them's still alive. This is one of the few things I didn't write down. But the estates or the individuals for Ditko, Stan Lee, Don Rico, Don Heck, Gene Colan, and Larry Lieber have all filed suit for notice of termination of copyright against Disney. By contrast, Disney has in turn filed 5 suits against Lawrence D. Lieber, Patrick S. Ditko, Michelle Hart Rico, and Buzz Donato Rico III, Nancy Solo and Eric Colan, and Keith A. Detweiler. Basically, they are arguing that there's not a question here. We want these people to stop suing us.
Yep.
Yeah.
They basically argued the Kirby case, because the Kirby case was decided at a court of appeal, is currently valid law, and to Disney's credit, in this instance, if we agree that's valid law, we agree that that's what the law should be, then yes, none of these people have a case, and we can all go home.
Right. So essentially they're saying there's been precedents set, hence therefore, back off, get your own sandwich.
Yes. And then the very summation of the counter case is really put the best by their lawyer, who Boris and I are actually vaguely familiar with, because it is one Toberoff, who also represented the Kirby estate in the 2014 case.
Yep, which we talked about in the incarnation of this very show with our old friend, Kyle.
But yeah, so Toberoff is back. He's back for another round against Disney. And I'm quoting him here. He says that at the core of these cases is an anachronistic and highly criticized interpretation of work made for hire, which needs to be rectified. So this is an instance where Toberoff does not have the facts, and Toberoff does not have the law on his side.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But to quote a lot of really old, really famous lawyers who've won a lot of cases, if you don't have the facts, argue the law. If you don't have the law, argue the facts. And if you have neither, bang the table.
So there's going to be a lot of table banging.
Already, there's a lot of table banging.
Yeah.
We're gonna
It actually is amazing to me that you've put in a little bit of research, a little bit of reading, right? And you've come to this, at this spot in the dissertation or the exploration of this topic. You've come to this spot. Just blows
Yes.
my mind that the representation hasn't. You know what I mean?
Oh no, he knows. Oh no,
Yeah.
Toberoff knows. This is a weird instance of I agree with everyone who's involved in this case.
Mm.
I agree with Disney. Disney's correct. If we go by the current rules and we don't change any of the rules, Disney's right. These people have no case.
Right.
Toberoff is arguing these rules are bad rules and we should change them.
Okay.
Right.
Which, that's how law works sometimes. Sometimes you're allowed to say, like, yes, these are the rules. We all agreed these are the rules. However, we can now see they're stupid rules.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Question
we could
for
say
you, Tyler. If
Yeah.
they back off right now, they change the rules, and now the rules are in their favor, can they go back and sue again? Or would part of this be saying, no, you can't sue us again, but we will move forward with trying to change something?
So that's actually an interesting case, and it depends how the law is worded. So one of the big dates that is super freaking important for all this, that we're going to talk about a lot, is 1978. So this brings me to the Copyright Act of 1976, when the U.S. Congress changed how copyright laws work. And then it came into effect in 1978. So the Kirby estate was actually suing under the pre-78 rules. Because the way law works is, unless the law explicitly says it changes the rules in these other instances, you go by the rules that were in place when the agreement was signed.
Oh.
So, for example, if you want to sue someone for a law and the law changes during your suit, the assumption is we look at the law at the time the suit was started.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a great question. It's a thing that people get confused and wrong a lot because, yeah, you're right. If they changed it right now, unless they specifically say something, like if they say like, hey, in the future, because the default would be in the future, here's the new rule for determining if something can get its copyright back or not. None of these people would have a chance under the new rules.
Yeah.
It has to retroactively say, also, we are changing the definition of what work for hire is, which is really at the core of this entire goddamn thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Before we can talk about work for hire, we got to talk about moral rights and copyrights.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the Eaton Center. Phil, Boris, you've been to the Eaton Center, right?
Of course.
I have.
Do you know the sculpture Flight Stop?
No. Can't recall it.
I don't.
Don't know it by name.
Yeah. Do you know all of those Canada geese sculptures hanging from the ceiling?
Yes.
Mhm.
That is actually a sculpture called Flight Stop by one Michael Snow. And it is one of the most important cases in Canadian law about moral rights. So moral rights are separate from copyrights, and they are basically, if you make a thing, you have certain rights that you cannot sell even if you want to.
Yeah.
And we all have agreed, because this is the Berne Convention, and then Canada has agreed to it, and the US has agreed to it. You know, for example, that's why Marvel has to say, these are the people who helped make these characters. Those are moral rights. No matter how much you get paid, you always get to be the person who created X, Y, or Z.
The corporation just can't say it's ours because we contracted somebody to make it, therefore it's ours. The moral rights say they have to accredit the creator.
Yes.
Okay.
Those can get a little bit funky because you can technically, in some jurisdictions, sign a contract agreeing to not enforce your moral rights,
Right.
but you still have them.
Right. You'd have to go to court to exercise.
Yeah.
If they're in not following that code.
And they sue you, and then lawsuits.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, the case for the Eaton Center was 1 year in the halcyon days of 1981, the management of the Eaton Center put red ribbons around the necks of all those geese.
Why?
Why? It was Christmas.
I know, but who wants a goose with a ribbon on its neck?
Look, here's the funnier part. Michael Snow freaked out.
Yep. I knew exactly where this was going.
And he argued that changes the message and the idea behind the art.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court agreed with him. And that's part of moral rights, is if let's say you create a thing, you have some rights to limit what can be done with it.
Interesting.
The other case that gets discussed a lot is actually the hypothetical of Bill Watterson. So all those bits that are made of like Calvin peeing on things,
Yeah.
technically, even if that has been licensed, which most of them aren't, Bill Watterson can say that actually violates my moral rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're turning Calvin from, a precocious, frustrated young child to angsty and anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's peeing on the Columbus Crew logo. I get it.
Yeah, or whatever they have him peeing on now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the thing of du jour.
yeah, we decided to talk about moral rights to be like, none of that's what we're talking about. That's just not what we're talking about. All these people are getting credit. This is copyright. And copyright is just a question of money. So,
Interesting
starting...
distinction.
Yes. And we had to touch on it because that's a separate issue. And some people claim various moral rights have been violated, but no one's suing over that because it's really hard to put a dollar sign on those.
Yeah.
You can put a ribbon on it.
You put a ribbon on it, and then Michael Snow can freak out. I mean, that's my favorite bit, is how much of law is made of just rich people having hissy fits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, it keeps
100%.
lawyers going, right? Like, that's...
Yeah.
The smart ones are the lawyers and all this.
Yeah. So, I got to do a quick bit on the Copyright Act. So, I'm going to try to go quick. Basically, after 1938, various creatives, it was originally done for artists, for recording artists and songwriters to claw back previously licensed work after 35 years. So, in that instance, let's say you were Taylor Swift. You had written a bunch of songs. This is a hypothetical where Taylor Swift isn't a singer or wrote songs that she did not herself sing. She wrote all these songs and then sold them, and Nicki Minaj became obscenely famous off of them. After 35 years, Taylor Swift would be able to go back, file a notice of copyright termination, and be like, I get rights to all those songs back.
Oh.
You can't sell them anymore.
So, like, Prince is a prime example of somebody who wrote a lot of songs.
Yes.
And his estate might try something like this when the time comes.
Yeah, I believe for Prince specifically, they have negotiated this already.
Okay.
In part because part of the purpose of this is not to be able to let Ditko come in, or the Ditko estate, and say, Disney, you can't make a Doctor Strange movie anymore. The idea is really, Disney's already in the best position. Disney already can make so much money. This is to give Ditko another round of negotiations.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're talking about Steve Ditko a lot today. But the idea being, if Steve Ditko is still alive and he wanted his money for making Doctor Strange, like he claims he did, and the court agreed you made Doctor Strange, the idea would be he would sit down at the table with Disney and be like, I can take this ball and go home. Let's talk numbers. And the idea being that in 90% of cases, they would negotiate a better deal. Steve Ditko would get some percentage of ticket sales or whatever. And everyone goes, I'm happy. And it really was, the idea was to protect creatives who sold stuff when they had no leverage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, down the road, be able to get their money back.
That seems fair. It sucks that you got to leverage lawyers and everything into it, but I guess There has to be some application of logic.
Yeah, well, it's also, how do you enforce anything becomes a question. Here's where it gets finicky. There are exclusions to this.
Oh, no.
And then there are exclusions to the exclusions because we have to be complicated. So this termination right has an exception. And that is you cannot terminate if you made work for hire. And then there's a bunch of rules what work for hire is. Basically, work for hire means you explicitly agree it's work for hire. You're usually getting paid for doing it. Like you're not like writing a script on a wing and a prayer that it gets picked up. This is Disney calls James Gunn, says, James Gunn, we want you to do a work for hire treatment on Guardians 3.
Which he's quite literally doing right now.
I almost guarantee that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets, X amount for writing the script. He gets Y amount if the script gets accepted. Z amount for them making the movie.
Yeah.
Everyone's happy. In that instance, he would not get the money back. He can't claim it back because it was done work for hire, and that's. And then they made it more complicated. So, no longer are all work for hires excluded. Now it's only some work for hire is not excluded. And there are 9 ways that it can get excluded. The only 2 we care about for today are collective work and motion picture or audiovisual work. The other ones include stuff like you're a translator, you are part of a compilation. Like if you did one song off of an album, you don't get that thing back. You signed the license indefinitely.
Yep.
Other ones are like if it's part of an atlas, because they don't want every time they want to do a new edition of an atlas, they have to call every single writer and make sure it's okay. Those are the 2 ones that are going to get us. So one of the questions that we have to ask is, are comics a collective work?
Interesting.
What do you think, guys?
I would have to say probably no.
I'm going to choose the opposite and say yes.
Why do you say no, Boris?
Why do I say no? That's a great question. I would have to say just the way that they define what a comic book is. Wouldn't that eventually lead to this? Like what the right answer is?
What do you mean?
In terms of, being a creator,
Yeah.
You being assigned the writer, you being assigned the inker, you being assigned whatever that is your job in said book. And while in my head it would make sense for it to be a collective, because you were assigned that role, that's your contribution to it, and that's it.
Oh, you're so close. You're so close and yet so far. What about you, Phil?
Oh, it just seems to me like you've got a collaboration going on, and you have a collaboration, like a collective idea on what you're publishing. And
Phil's
you're
got it,
publishing-
Boris.
Yeah.
And you're publishing it month after month, right? Like, so
Monthly
you're
doesn't
basically
matter.
saying, oh yeah, okay, whatever
Yeah.
time frame, but you're saying this is something we're creating, and this is something we're going to make on an ongoing basis, possibly.
Yeah. It's multiple people all contributing to a work they've all been hired to do.
Boris got it right. He just had the
Boris was so close but got to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
Because the fact that Marvel is assigning it, or if it was one of the writers hired everyone else, if it was an indie comic, if it was Spawn and McFarlane hired everyone else work for hire, still McFarlane's baby, even though he's one of the writers or one of the artists or whatever. Ugh.
You see, I'm wrapping my head around, and I know a lot of our listeners probably have this in their own workplace. I know Boris probably does, where every year you got to go through the whole, the clauses. You have to review the clauses in your company. And one of them that I always dote over is the fact that anything that we generate while working for X company, X tech company, or whatever,
Yep.
is technically the property of our company. It's not
Yes.
anything that we created. Like in person, like it's
Mhm.
just got these funny words in the
Well,
definitions where it's like
more
we
so.
can't claim it, you can't get it back. It's
More
ours,
so,
even if you
more so, there's NDAs around the fact that you can't even
Yes.
talk about you helping create XYZ.
Yes. You're
It's
both right.
interesting.
The funny thing is this work for hire specifically is a case of magic words make law.
Yeah.
And I'd be really curious, and I'm not going to ask you because I don't want you guys to get in the weird situation of having to answer, but listeners as well, think about whether or not your contract, when it says that, includes the phrase work for hire. Because in most jurisdictions, if it does not explicitly say it's work for hire, the assumption's that it's not. So if, for example, you work on a comic and they do not specify it's a work for hire contract, you might get all that back.
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. But that's the and I'm using air quotes when I say the beauty of the law, right? And the beauty of contract writing is that if it's not there, you can assume everything of the opposite.
Yep. Well, yeah.
For lack of a better term. I don't know if I
No,
worded it properly, but you know what I mean, right? It has to be explicitly stated or else.
Oh, yeah. You would get in trouble at law school, but I'm not going to get mad at you here for that.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
But you're right. And you know, I am a person who thinks that using magic words in law is bad. Like, it's a bad habit for lawyers and for like how we structure a legal system. Like having to be like, well, these 3 words magically change the intent. It creates work for lawyers, and it guarantees and safeguards a level of expertise that is based on jargon rather than being good at your job.
Loophole lawyering.
It's part of it.
Yep.
Oh, it is. And, you know, I know you have legal training. I'm not having a shot at lawyers per se, but I know that the predominant feeling amongst a lot of people is about that. But to be fair, it's an industry, and I'm not offended by the fact that lawyers thrive in industry that they create.
Oh, sure.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, like I write contracts all day, SOWs. You know, so yeah, it's mind numbing sometimes when I get to the legal review. Luckily, I've always done a half decent job on them, but like it's just you just get used to it. Beauty of using templates and whatnot, and that's
I was gonna say
what.
I was gonna say how much of it's just a template, and you're really only changing maybe 4 or 5 clauses, and you're just like, well, we don't need this clause, but we do need this clause from my big template that I'm drawing from.
Yeah, there's all the legal mumbo jumbo around it that I shouldn't change, and then and there's obviously the things that I do need to change. The offer, for example, like what exactly are we executing? The acceptance, it's what is the acceptance criteria for said work, and then obviously the consideration, which is the money part, and that obviously changes because the number of hours changes. And for our listeners, when I say an SOW, I mean a statement of work. So it's basically the company that I work for will put services or something to give to our customers. So for example, they might want a custom code for XYZ. We will make it for them. It has to go through the legal process. Hence, therefore, we need an SOW to execute the work.
Yeah.
And
that's
actually,
finished.
interestingly enough, we also have in every contract an intellectual property item in these contracts, because we have to explicitly state who owns this custom code, who owns and this is where it can get a little interesting with some customers. For example, some of our bigger Fortune 500 customers, they want to own it. They not only do they want to own it, they don't want us to use a single line of code ever again for another customer.
Yep. For reasons.
For reasons. Yeah.
Yeah,
because
for reasons.
the reason why in their mentality is basically, we're asking this from this company because this is going to give us a leg up to make our process easy. Fuck everyone else.
Yep. Well, and they want to secure their advantage in the market.
Exactly.
Yeah. 100%. And a lot of that, it's worth belaboring, is all the thing that companies do and freelancers do less, but they should make sure to do, is the contract is only worth something if you take it to court, right? And a lot of people in non-tech industries, definitely, I've worked in quite a few where you start to see contract slippage, where it's stuff of like, I mean, the contract says payment in 90 days, but we're going to pay at 180 and we're not going to pay the interest, and they're not going to sue us over it. And it's fine.
Yep, that happens a lot.
Because, yeah, I mean, payment terms especially, but even like other stuff of like, yeah, we sub-licensed this design out, and it's technically our contract didn't allow it, but I called Steve and he said it was okay. And strictly speaking, you should get all that written down in case someone takes you to court. But if you never go to court, none of it matters.
Yep. It's funny. Now that we're talking about all this, you know what I'm thinking of? That company that we used to deal with a lot on this show, and those contracts, those bullshit contracts that they had for creators.
I mean, those contracts were... those contracts were likely often blatantly illegal.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where, and I can talk about this because it's widely known, they showed up on a Judge Judy type show, not Judge Judy, but a Judge Judy type show, and the TV judge told them that their IP their IP claims were ludicrous.
Yep.
And they lost the case on television.
Yep.
Yeah.
Funny that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Portland for a second and the importance of work for hire. Tyler, if you remember the movie Body of Evidence, it's a Madonna film. Paramount Pictures.
I don't remember the details.
You don't need to. You need to remember it takes place in Portland. So, in Body of Evidence, there's a very famous shot of the Portland building. Alternatively called the Portland Municipal Services Building.
Okay.
I think it's a really ugly building. Its color scheme is it's pink, brown, and green. However, they made a statue called Portlandia that is on top of the main entrance to the Portland building.
Okay.
Everything seems fine, right?
Yeah.
They hired him to make a statue. He made a statue.
I'm getting the feeling somebody put a ribbon on a Canada Goose neck.
It's not even that much. Oh, it's not even that much happened.
Wow.
Body of Evidence was made. And Raymond Caskey, the artist who made Portlandia, sued Paramount Pictures because the city of Portland forgot to make that contract work for hire.
Oh.
So no one's allowed to take a picture of that. No one's allowed to include that in any non-fair use without getting his permission, which means without paying him.
Here's an interesting one also. To the same vein, wrestlers. A lot of them. You know where I'm going with this, because you've seen a lot of these court cases, and you're going to see this a lot more with celebrities and whatnot. The more tattoos they have, and wrestling is a perfect example of them. They're shirtless half the time. The males, that is.
Yeah.
A lot of them have tattoos. Some of them have very specific tattoos. Some of them have custom-made tattoos. And their IP, I shouldn't say IP, their image ends up on video games, for example. So
let's back up a second. Who owns the tattoos?
That's exactly where we're going with this. Like, let's just start there. Who owns the tattoos, right? And that's essentially what what's happening a lot of the times. The artist, or the tattoo artist, I should say, is suing everyone under the sun because they are having their work featured in video games, posters, magazines, etc., etc., etc. And now that there's streaming services and content is king, and everything is worth $1, they want their fair share.
And it's not a work for hire contract.
Exactly.
So legally, they should get it.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Like, to me, the contract implies, though, if you're going in and getting inked.
But what did we just say? What did we just say? Unless it's explicitly said in a contract, in a legal contract, you're SOL.
So
also,
do you have to get a contract drawn up in order to get inked?
That's the world we live in.
Technically, yes. There is, depending on your jurisdiction, there is a default contract that is always assumed. Mm-hmm. In Canada, every province has the default contract. And every time you pay someone, if there's ever a fight, that's the contract we assume, unless you agree to something different. In the States, they do it a little bit different. I think every single state
has one.
Yeah.
But also there is like a federal one, and then also there's like industry ones.
Yep.
They have like a weird convoluted system that I'm not as familiar with, because I know industry standards are a bigger issue there than here.
Yep.
Okay.
For determining if a thing is contractually allowed or not.
And that's why, like, new industries, especially in certain sectors of tech, they don't know what to do, because what do you assume XYZ services fall under? Oh yeah, well, and that's part of the entire business model of Uber and Airbnb is being undefinable under old laws. Ooh. Oh. We can dedicate a whole episode on Uber and WWE over employees versus contractors.
I mean, let's get back. I mean, we're going to touch on that a little bit, but let's talk about WWE for one little more bit. And Phil brings up a good point of, let's say that you are tattooing Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Nowadays, you 100%, there's a contract behind that, right? Like, first of all, he's probably not going to some no-name tattoo artist. And I say it with love. Listeners, I am decently heavily inked, but there's a difference between, your Hollywood tier tattoo artist who's famous versus the person in your local downtown.
Yep.
They just is. So they're 100% negotiating those contracts. And yeah, I bet a bunch of those are. But let's say you tattooed Dwayne Johnson when he was 16.
Right.
And he became super famous. And I use Dwayne Johnson because his tattoos are part of his brand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, should you not get a cut?
Exactly. You technically help create this persona, this brand. So you should.
And you can't. How do you argue a counterfactual of Dwayne Johnson would have been as famous without the tattoos?
You can't. Again, because now we're talking hypotheticals. He became famous. Yeah. One can assume it was because of the help of the tattoos. Like, a good lawyer can make that argument. Yep. You can't make the counter argument that without the tattoos he'd be just as popular, because we don't know. Yep. There's no you can't throw shit at a wall and hope it sticks on something that hasn't happened, on hypotheticals.
Yeah, it's 100% a counterfactual. So for those
question.
Yeah, go for
it. In this scenario, let's say Dwayne The Rock Johnson goes in and he's pre-designed his tattoo.
Yep.
Because I know a lot of tattoo artists put their own spin on things. You go in with an idea, they visualize something for you, they get your approval, they put it on your body, then they go and do it with the ink. If he goes in with his own design and gets somebody to do it, does that change the context of this?
Partially. So that is very similar to, let's say you did a cover for Todd McFarlane. You did a Spawn cover. And you don't own Spawn, but you technically own that cover under whatever your contract terms are. It's the same thing.
Right.
You know, and it gets a little bit funky if you're doing something like tracing of it's like, well, how transformative is the work you're doing?
Frickin'
And-
tracers.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
And if you're like literally tracing, like, yeah, but if you're tattooing someone, you are actually transforming it from one medium to another. So I think you could make the case that it is still a transformative work. And in that instance, you would have a claim, but it would be a smaller claim, right?
Yep.
Interesting.
All of these, because at the end of the day, you know, a judge, if this goes for a judge, they're going to have to try to put a dollar value on it. And generally what I would assume from my research experience is a unique design tattoo would get more money than one that was like Dwayne Johnson sketched this and brought it in, and they literally just like they did the thing where they printed off and they were able to put the temporary tattoo and they just trace that.
Mhm.
That person would probably get less.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it's artwork. Hey, what can you do?
Yep.
Like, what can you say, right? Like,
And-
as much as it becomes a part of you, and that's, I think, where the biggest mental block for me is, because it's a part of you, and you're defining it as your image, but they had input on it. They had
Well-
artistic license.
yeah, and that's where it gets like, and that's I think that's a good example though, because like a lot of like Spider-Man, it's the exact same, right? Like
Yep.
Spider-Man was created, and then a lot of people have done different takes and have added to it.
Yeah.
And all those people have various contracts and rights to various iterations.
Yep.
Right? Like the person like Bendis creating Miles has more rights to Miles Morales than he does to Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, what if?
Oh.
I'm trying to think. How can I word this?
Yeah.
Let's say Todd McFarlane. You know, he created Spawn.
Yeah. Well, I want to. Well, can you think it over, and I do a quick bit about image because that's a great tie-in.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's worth one of the big things that I love talking about with this is people like to frame this entire thing in the media and in conversations as this is creatives versus business. But it's worth remembering that, first of all, the moment Jack Kirby started hiring people, he used work for hire agreements. It's worth noting that in 1992, that the people who founded Image Comics having their conniption about work for hire, all of them use work for hire now.
Yep.
Mhm.
So this is just a thing that people do. Like it was begun with this noble idea of each creator could fully own and control his own characters and determine their destinies, according to Jim Lee of Wildstorm Productions. But everyone involved in Image who is actually like working for one of the big publishers and is working on someone else's project, it's all work for hire.
Yep.
And it's the exact same, like it's everyone just does the exact same model, but smaller.
Yep.
Figure out your question now, Boris?
Yeah. So it's this one's a hard one just because you know, he would never accept this to happen. But let's just say, for lack of a better term, Todd McFarlane has Spawn. Let's say artist A creates Gunslinger Spawn, and it's out there in the public domain. McFarlane doesn't like it. What do we do?
Okay.
How do we handle that one?
Okay, so there's actually a case directly on point involving Todd McFarlane.
Yep.
So first off, we're talking about fan fiction. So strictly speaking, under the current law, I'm sorry, fan fiction people, I know you don't like to hear this. I've gotten in fights with people. Strictly speaking, all fan fiction and all fan art is technically not allowed under copyright.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people see the value and recognize the value in letting people do it.
Yes.
Under the current rules, if Todd McFarlane says no one can do Spawn but him, that's the rules.
Well, we've seen publishers go into Artist Alley and hand cease and desist for this very reason. You know, oftentimes, They want to control the message. They want to control their brand. For example, you don't want Mario, Peach, and Luigi having a threesome with, Toadstool in the background and a video camera, right? Like,
Well, Nintendo
that's the type
doesn't.
of stuff
Some people
that
100% want it.
yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the type of stuff that these companies are trying to control with their brand and their image, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing with George Lucas, right? You guys can go crazy with doing the fan fiction stuff, but number one, you can't make money off of it.
Yep.
And number two, no sex.
Yep.
Right? Like, here's my moral line. I don't want to see Princess Leia in a gangbang.
Yeah.
Like,
and it gets complicated because you can talk about whether or not there are what are called open licenses, which are a big thing in the gaming industry, where it's like, here is a thing, whether it's a designed piece of game design, whether it's a mechanic, whether it's a piece of code, and it's just like, this is open license. Anyone can use it. I don't give a shit. Or there are conditional licenses, which is stuff of like, yeah, if you send me $10, you get to use this. And that's how like a lot of fonts are done.
Yep.
If you want like a fancy font, you're usually paying $10 to $49. And usually it's an unlimited commercial license. Like, it's like, you just get that font for forever.
And then you got the situation like Epic, which license out its games, and if you start cashing in on it, they get a return
for their Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
Okay. On to Boris's other point, a phenomenal case on this very point, which is Neil Gaiman created the character Angela as part of Spawn.
Spawn number 9.
Yeah. And the entire case was basically based around whether or not that was work for hire or not.
Yep.
And, McFarlane basically said, yep, it was work for hire. That was the whole deal. And Neil Gaiman wins this case because he points out, I mean, that's not the understanding I had, and there's no paperwork saying it's work for hire.
Yep.
And the assumption is, if you don't say it, it's not. And that's why Angela is now a Marvel character.
Exactly.
So
hilarious.
So all this brings us to Toberoff. And he's arguing that the old work for hire model is bad and bullshit. And one of his contentions is with the so-called Marvel model or Marvel method. Now, you know what this is? Have you heard this one? They don't do it anymore, which makes it harder to know. It's less of an oil thing.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Boris might remember this one. Do you remember the Marvel method?
I know we've talked about it.
You heard a moment? So the Marvel method is not how comics are done anymore. However, this is how Stan Lee especially loved to do comics. Where it would be, the writer would give the artist a synopsis for the story they were working on. And it could be, usually it was about an issue, and sometimes it'd be like 2 or 3 issues. They'd be like, yeah, here's the arc we're going to do. I want this, 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 I want this. And they would like do that. And the artist would do the entire layout and art from that synopsis. And then the writer would come back in and do dialogue.
Yeah.
Oof.
And in those instances, under the definition of the era, the artist was just the artist and the writer was the writer. Under a modern definition, most people would give that artist a co-writer credit.
Yeah.
Because they are making very definitive decisions.
Yep.
Yeah, you're contributing to the story.
I mean, they're contributing no matter what, but having worked with artists, almost every artist I've worked with says that the more description you give, the easier their job is, because the less they have to like actually be creative and figure stuff out, the easier their job is.
It's a tough job. You're interpreting a vision.
100%.
Right?
100%. But, it's the difference between an Alan Moore script where each panel has at least a page of text to describe it, and who was it? There's someone else I was reading recently. I was reading their scripts. I think it was Snyder. Snyder, the comic one.
American Vampire, because Snyder has like 1.5 pages of dialogue.
Yes, but I mean, like, but his panel descriptions are very sparse.
Panel descriptions are insane. His are insane.
Now, I'm not thinking of him then. I'm thinking of someone. I know I've seen some of Gaiman's can get pretty sparse, but it's like, oh, this person stands over that person. And it's like, where are they? What do you mean they stand over them? Is the one person kneeling or lying down? And that matters. And Gaiman usually gets away with it because he'll have like Gaiman tends to front load his description in scripts. Tends to. So that helps, but it makes it a little bit harder versus then Kirkman is notorious for just extreme of consciousness. So you'll have like contradictory stuff in the description.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't want to derail this, but
No,
I have
this
a
is good.
question.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about art.
Yeah.
How does this apply to an actor who's ad-libbing?
Oh, what a good
does
question.
That open up like a whole nother Rubik's Cube of stuff? Because if you look at certain personalities in acting, they definitely bring their own brand and their own humor and their own wit to a role.
Yes. You're
And
100% right. And that is why, by law, movies are exempt from all these rules.
Yep.
That's like, yeah, you're right. Movies just, none of these rules apply to movies.
you're just like, no way. We're not gonna
None of this applies. No, if you're anyone other than the writer of the script, sometimes everyone else is work for hire.
Okay.
The writer of the script may or may not be, but pretty much everyone else is work for hire.
Okay.
Or movies have a bunch of like their own separate rules because very early on we were like, oh, movies are really complicated. Video games are also similar. Video games count as collective work. Undeniably, they count as collective work. So it doesn't matter. You don't get your copyright back if you're work for hire.
Yep.
So
I just figured a lot of our listeners are asking that question too.
it's a great question. I did touch on it earlier, but you're right. We should have gone deeper on it and basically be like, yeah, movies, none of these rules apply to movies.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wheels back on. Sorry.
No, it was a great question. And it comes into, so now we're going to talk about Steve Ditko. So, Steve Ditko has made, over the years, and friends of Steve Ditko have made a lot of claims. At times, Ditko, or people on his behalf, claim he created Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
And no one seems to agree with him that he soloed those characters. Yep. John Romita in 2010 is like, Ditko did not solo Spider-Man. It was Lee and Ditko, and the two hated each other.
Yep.
But they were definitely both writing. I know because they fought all the time. And that's how I know.
Yep.
And that would mean that definitionally, that's a collective work. And then it gets exempt from all these rules. So again, if we don't change the rules, this is why Ditko does not have a chance on getting a lot of those, or the Ditko estate doesn't have a chance getting a bunch of these back.
Yep.
Because it's collective work.
Right.
We're going to put a pin in Doctor Strange for right now.
Uh-oh.
And we're going to talk about Ditko specifically because he's a weird dude.
Yes, he is.
And he appears to lie a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get into his politics, some of which I find reprehensible, but people can read that on their own. Ditko got weird. So it's worth noting that after Ditko left Marvel, he lived the rest of his life in Manhattan. And he worked and had his own workspace in Manhattan. And that's relevant because let's think about Manhattan real estate prices. So, someone tried to get a hold of him during the Spider-Man film era, the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi era.
Mm-hmm.
And Ditko is notoriously hard to get to talk on the record about anything. In 2012, Ditko made the claim that he never made a cent off of any of the Marvel movies that were published at that time.
Okay.
He further claimed at different times, and then would disagree with his own claims, based upon reporting, that he had made no money from Marvel since he left. Which it would, it appears, be in contravention to his contracts. Because a lot of the time, if you're a big deal at these places, as part of your work for hire contract, you renegotiate at one point and you're like, look, I bring you a lot of money. I want this new set of clauses on any character I create. And that's why Neil Gaiman is still involved in making the Sandman TV show, even though DC owns it. That's why the Five Nights at Freddy's guy, for some reason, has veto rights over, like, he has final cut privilege on the movie.
Yep.
Despite the fact, like, he's not a movie person.
Yep.
Right.
You negotiate terms, and that's part of the deal of being a creative. I mean, none of this is me defending these rules, but these are the rules of the game.
It's safe to say Ditko's getting back, like, kickback money off of these deals.
Well,
right? Like, he's getting, like, not kickback and illegal, but I'm just saying he's getting paid from these deals. And I have used it as I'm not getting it from that.
Oh, no. To counter Boris as well, a reporter from The Vulture in 2016 interviewed his neighbor and got this. And I'm going to quote her from the piece. One time, about 10 years ago, so this would be 2006,
yep,
I accidentally got a piece of his mail, speaking about Ditko. I opened it and then realized it wasn't mine because that check had just too many zeros.
Yeah.
That's probably why he can work in that little office, and he's doing all right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his neighbor in 2006 got his mail, and he was getting royalty checks from someone that had, quote, and this is someone else living in Manhattan in the 2000s. So also not a very poor person being like, oh, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So Ditko's getting money from somewhere. And it's worth noting that Ditko's independent work did not do well.
Right.
His late career political work did not sell great.
No, it did not.
I'm just trying to put that where he's getting paid and he's expecting that he's not connecting where that paycheck's coming from. He just realizes the paycheck's there. And then he turns around and says, well, I didn't get paid from it, because he honestly believes that kind of crap. And he's getting older.
I don't want to try to figure
pure
out what Ditko
speculation.
was thinking.
You never
Ditko
want to try to figure this out.
Ditko definitely had a chip in his shoulder and was notorious, especially like later in his career, of fighting with people.
Okay.
Like, he loathed Stan Lee for decades over what a lot of people were like, yeah, they fought, but it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. But maybe, like, Ditko very much, like, he quit Marvel allegedly because, like, his genius wasn't being appreciated, is how a few people talk about it. So, Doctor Strange. In my research, I found a story that is doing the rounds that I have no proof on. But it is a claim that is being made. And that is that Steve Ditko created Doctor Strange before Marvel published it. And that he wrote it separately and brought it in. And if that's the case, and this story claims that he was the original first writer and the first artist. So if all that's true, and he created it outside of his work for hire agreement, he has a case on that one.
Yep.
A lot of ifs.
Yeah, how do you prove that now?
Yep.
I mean, you'd go into Marvel's paperwork from the era.
Yeah. The paper trail will show somewhere, somehow show that they got this from him. It just didn't magically show up on their doorstep.
I mean, other people claim, and this is where it gets fuzzy, because people have had different, like, stories that, I mean, I think we've all heard those stories where it's like, one of these two is definitely lying. Like, person one says, like, we had steak. Person two says we had fish. One of them's wrong or lying.
Yep.
Versus the ones where you're like, oh, it is very easy that people are all slightly misremembering or coloring a thing, and they could both be mostly right. So, other people involved, Ramita and Kirby both talked about how, the Doctor Strange idea, like, kind of came internally. They were talking about a magic character. And then some people have said Kirby, like, had the first idea, but it was, like, at Marvel under their behest, so it'd be work for hire. Some people claimed Stan Lee came in one day in the typical Stan Lee of, like, gee willikers, I got an idea, and then just, like, listed off stuff. As Stan Lee was apparently, like, he would just do this. So, Doctor Strange is one of the big characters.
Yeah. And there's a lot of movies and stuff involving him
Yes.
right now. So this has some potential if it can be proven, obviously.
Yes. So, I mean, the center of all of these cases is what is work for hire and whether we like that definition. Going back to early It's Canon, the Kirby estate, they actually made 45 claims to different comics companies, mostly Marvel and DC. And they included a grand total of contract terminations for 262 separate characters. And even though Marvel settled and appears to have paid out to the Kirby estate, the appeals court found that the evidence that it was work for hire was, quote, overwhelming. Kirby did not create the artwork until Lee told him to.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that was under pre-1978. You did not have to specify work for hire.
Mm-hmm.
So in those contracts, they didn't specify work for hire, but the court pointed out you didn't have to. Yep. So in 2014, we were all set to go to the Supreme Court, and they settled. It's a sealed settlement. No one's talking. So very obviously, Disney does not want this to get in front of the Supreme Court and to change what the rules are for copyright termination. And in this instance, they ran the numbers and they were like, let's say it's a 10% chance of the Kirby estate winning. That would cost us $100 billion. That means it's worth about $10 billion for us to for us to pay them out.
Yeah.
To simplify the math, right? Like if you're like talking about that much money, you don't want to take any chance.
Yeah, you have to bet for yourself at that point. You have to figure what's the other side need or want.
Yep.
And can we afford it?
Exactly.
Because we can't afford losing it.
It is worth noting right now that the court is overwhelmingly precedent is in favor of not changing this definition.
Mm-hmm.
The Kirby one went through multiple cases, and every court found this is a work for hire agreement. I mean, as much as reporters in the comic space talked about it being like rah, good luck, they were not doing well. In the DC/DW versus Schuster case, same thing.
Yeah.
The court was like, no. It's also worth noting, to get a little bit inside baseball, the current Supreme Court is even more corporate friendly than the one was in 2014.
That's exactly where I was going to go with this, is we have to take a look at what the Supreme Court looks like at any given point in time to assume who they are most likely to side with.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to see how political the law can be.
Bananas, right? And that's Toberoff's entire claim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm fascinated about all that.
So,
now, how long does something like this take? Well, I guess...
Oh my God.
They're going to be settling, right? Like, they're going to be settling out of court.
Hard to say.
They're going to make court appearances. They're going to go through this process to a point.
So they'll probably. So my bet with how much money Disney has and the fact that Disney actually kind of wants a precedent right now, and in fact, Disney has filed a lawsuit saying this needs to stop. We don't want to get sued every time someone thinks, hey, maybe we have a case. We don't want to have to pay all those lawyers. And that's actually what their lawsuits are about. Their lawsuits are basically saying, can we once and for all say that these work for hire? And unless we change the definition, they need to stop suing us.
Yeah.
Because if they get that order, every time someone else tries to sue, Disney will be able to send a lawyer in for one day, and that lawyer will go, motion to dismiss, they don't have standing, and under this previous case, and the judge, if agrees with them, goes, yeah, they don't have standing, get out of here.
Yeah.
And then Disney has to pay for one day instead of months.
That's worth the investment.
100%. So it very much seems like Disney's looking at the way the wind is blowing, looking at how much money they have on hand, and is like, I think we can fight them. It's worth noting that Toberoff is currently representing like half of the people filing against Disney right now. And I don't know. For me to put on my observer hat, I think they just all want checks. I think they're just like, pay us to go away.
Yeah. That's exactly what this seems like. Like the patent trolls.
I mean, I would say this is not as gross as patent trolls.
I shouldn't compare it to them, but at the end of the day, they want a check.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Toberoff speaks a big game about, like, we should change the definition. And I don't know if he believes that or not. I'm not going to try to assume his intention. I think we should actually talk about changing the definition. But, I mean, if he thinks we should change the definition, that's what he should say. Yeah. If he thinks that his people should get paid and doesn't care about the definition, that's also what he would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part here is you have people making these claims, taking these companies to court, precedence is going to be set, and then people with legitimate claims are going to be shit out of luck.
Well, I mean, the argument has always been yes, and that's the way it's always been, because it is so hard for the little guy or gal to get their day in court.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? Like, all these names we're talking about, these are all, like, estates that have money in them.
Yep.
Yes.
Right?
Like we talked about on the show. They have a group of lawyers sitting there going, or a group of accountants going, it's time to bring it up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the kind of clever parts of the law is there are windows, right? These, if they don't file within a certain window, they don't get to just like sit and wait indefinitely. Right. There are certain windows you have to file within. I think there's a series of 5-year windows that we don't need to go into the specifics over.
Yeah.
We got 2 more things to touch on to wrap up. First of all is Jason Voorhees, because there was a case today on Jason Voorhees. And the second one was, I want to talk about reporting on all this stuff, because I have had to read so many brain dead takes on this by bad reporters.
Yep, I can imagine.
So many reporters in our industry do not read carefully or closely, and it leads to and gives ammunition to these stupid online internet fights that don't know what they're talking about.
I think the problem is more that reporters it's partially that, and it's also they don't understand what they're reading, so they make some bold assumptions in their article or don't explain things properly, and the articles at the end of the day are shit, for lack of a better term.
I mean, I was gonna say, then they're a bad reporter.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like, if you don't understand, like you, for example, have the leg up because you have that background.
And I have 9 pages of notes and talked to 3 lawyers for this podcast today.
See, there you go.
None of who are willing to go on, but all ones that I was like, can you clarify this? And there's still a question I don't fully understand that I'm not representing to the audience. I skirted around it because I don't fully understand of what if Ditko wins?
Yeah.
What literally happens to like the Doctor Strange when it's out? I could not get a definitive answer.
Yeah. There's a
But
lot of
it just-
unknowns, right? Because now the claims you've opened that forbidden door, and who knows what's behind that door, right? But this is also a case of reporters not being the best at reporting, and it's also a combination, in my opinion, of reporters trying to get the story out first and fast that they just don't know what they're reading. They get like Cole's notes from someone and make an article out of it. Again, irresponsible as fuck. But there's the difference between reporting, in-depth reporting 20 years ago versus clickbaits today.
I mean, to their credit, it was only the geek-oriented news people who were getting it wrong. Every single more traditional media outlet got it right.
But, and this goes to show you there's something about this industry,
Who's to say? I mean, I'm going to name some names, but first I want to talk about a case that is tied to this, kind of. So Jason Voorhees and the Jason movies. That first idea, the first Jason script, was written by Victor Miller. And he has been suing for copyright termination for that original script. He can't claim the movies because rules don't apply to movies.
Right.
He can claim for that original script, which would give him the Jason character.
Ooh.
The entire question was that script written under not for work for hire or not? What were you going to say, Boris?
There's something similar happening in the Predator franchise.
100%.
Yeah.
So, and for a bunch of these movies, it's worth talking about how movies are made. And it's sometimes you get told, write me a script about X, Y, and Z. And that might be work for hire, depending on your contract. But a lot of people write a script and then they shop it around. And in those instances, you own that script and you own that idea. And as of September 30th, 2021, at 4 p.m, a court found in favor of Victor Miller and said, no, that was not work for hire. He wrote that script. That's his copyright.
Yep.
So it's his.
So what's happened as a result of that?
As a result, well, it's going to get appealed. It's going to get appealed, and it might go before the Supreme Court. If it goes before the Supreme Court, I think he would still win if he can afford to fight it.
Yep.
Which is part of why it will get appealed, is because one of the strategies is you try to bankrupt the other side because they can't fight you if they have more money. He wants to reboot it. He basically said, I don't like half of the Jason movies out here. I'm the original writer. I want to reboot it, and I think I can make a better Jason movie.
Yep. The brothers who made Predator, they're using the exact same method to try to get their franchise back.
Yep. And for these ones, it's literally always a question of, was this a work-for-hire contract or not? All right. Because of this case and bad reporting. So Certified Forgotten, who represents themselves as a deeper reportage, and they had 5 pages on this, got the definition of work for hire wrong.
Oof.
They confused work for hire and employed and not and contractors who are not work for hire. They conflated those all a lot. So I posted on their blog, and if they would have me on their podcast, or I'll let them on this podcast, someone tell them. I would love to talk to them about it. Because I think it was an honest mistake for them, because they seemed like they did their research, but they just caught me at the end of a really rough day of bad takes. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yep.
A lot of people talking about Disney are like, these people have such a good case. And it's like, no, they don't. They might have a case, but it's not this is not, there's definitely a desire to frame it, I would argue, as the little guy artist versus the big bad company.
Yeah.
And maybe it is, but in pushing that narrative, you shouldn't lie about, you can still push your narrative and not lie about facts.
Yes.
It's sensationalism, right?
I think that's part of it, yeah.
like honestly, you're gonna get the clicks, you're gonna get the attention. You're putting an opinion out, but your journalism is about investigating the facts. And if you don't know the facts, then you have to attain them.
Well, and you know, representing things and like sharing them, right? Like part of your job is as a journalist 100% to provide analysis and thought on it. But Bleeding Cool said that this Jason Voorhees case was very similar to the Disney case. And it's like, I know you don't know what you're talking about because this case has no influence on the Disney case.
You know that's the first time that we've said that website's name in 6 years on this show. It's been 6 years since I've allowed that website to be named.
I look at what they're saying sometimes just to be like, what take is coming from this corner of the internet?
Yep.
Because people read it. But God, so much of it's just like, so much of Bleeding Cool is just pressers.
It is. It's a headline. It's headline clickbait.
I mean, a lot of these, I think, are literally just like, they got the presser and they posted it.
Yeah.
Dude, I would say 85% of geek, and it's probably other industries are the same, but let's focus on geek right now. That's all they do. They take a headline and post it and say, this is what we got from these people. It's very rare to find an actual article explaining anything nowadays.
Especially in terms that you can understand, like conversational terms. It's either going to be a deep dive that you feel unqualified for, or a bad take, right? That just in general. I'm not going to be specific.
And I'm all right with adding the original release in your article.
Yeah.
But I still feel like there needs to be a summary somewhere.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, maybe it's the circles I run in, but I've been curating a lot to avoiding stuff that's just this. It's why going back to Bleeding Cool or something boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I like reading the Mary Sue, not because I always agree with them, because I'll disagree with them, but very rarely are they just posting pressers.
Yep. That's a website that in my mind like really does a great job of, at the very least, while my opinion might differ from theirs, they do a good job of reporting the news, not just throwing the news at you so that you can interpret it as you wish.
I mean, what are the other ones? Like, I don't know. There were so many takes that were just like not aware of these nuances and not caring about like some of the larger ramifications, right? Like if we were to redefine work for hire, that has major considerations we have to talk about, right?
Yep.
Like if all of a sudden, you know, Ditko and Kirby and all these estates can come back and get these back, which maybe they should. Like I'm the first to agree that case can be made, and I think we should redefine work for hire. I just don't know to what, because like, should we let one of the original writers for like Fallout, which I think had like the original one had 4 or 5 writers, should one of them be able to come and kill the Fallout franchise because they don't want this?
Exactly.
And you know, there's a lot of artists out there, as we said with, you know, Snow earlier, who have egos and don't like certain decisions, and like we'd have so many things being killed because people disagree with the politics.
Yep. Exactly.
Right? Like, yeah.
Partisan politics.
Yeah.
It's not even partisan politics. It's literally just like going back to Ditko, great example. He would have killed a lot of projects based on the politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Moore would have done the exact same thing from the other direction.
Yeah.
Right? Ditko's pretty far right. Moore is pretty far left.
Yep.
And both of them would have probably killed. Like, Moore would have killed Watchmen 100%. The before Watchmen would have killed all of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
None of that would have gotten made.
None of it.
Which
None of it would have.
You know, maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. But
Yeah. But who's
he could have
to
killed
say?
it. He would have.
Who's to say?
I mean, that's my thing. That's my thing, right? Is that should be part of this discussion of that these definitions should be changed, but we can't just like everyone gets their stuff back.
Yeah.
No rules anymore. It's like, all right, well, fucking who owns Doctor Who now?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's the name for the episode. Who owns Doctor Who now?
With that said, Phil, do your thing.
Well, if you enjoyed what you just heard and you want to contact us and let us know what you think, you can track us down at www.itscanonpodcast.com. You can shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at It's Canon Podcast. You can email us at show@itscanonpodcast.com. You can subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere you find podcasts. You're going to find the It's Canon Podcast. And if you like what you heard, be sure to, subscribe, leave rate and review if the platform allows it, and tell your friends about the show, because we'd like them to join in with us too.
Thanks for that. Honestly, thank you so much, Tyler. This was awesome.
Yes.
We didn't get to a conclusion, but I don't think that was the point. The conclusion at the end of the day, what would you say, Tyler?
Right. What's the conclusion? Everyone's right. We need a change in this arena. I think everyone, Disney loves how it is right now. And Disney's right of like, with the way the rules are written, Disney gets all the toys.
Yep.
I agree we should change the rules. I just don't know what to.
Exactly.
And it's not, there's no simple answers. That's the conclusion.
Yep. That's
He
exactly
guys with the most toys wins.
Damn it, Phil.
That's pretty much how it is, unfortunately. All right, it is the It's Canon Podcast, a podcast where we talk about all things geek, all things pop culture, and the best part of it all is that it's all in canon. He's Tyler, he's Phil, I'm Boris. Good night.